Are you sure?
Here's the 30-second lesson on what legends know. Never ask a bride why she's getting married. Don't wear a skirt on a windy day. Deodorant is not a shower. Don't sniff chili flakes. And don't forget, saving is not investing. Legends don't just save, they invest in mutual funds. Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
Gunfire erupted from the back window of a car driving past the fairground in Karachi's Liaqatabad. The blood of the dead was soaked up by posters and buntings calling for support of the jihad in Kashmir. Few people, an American diplomat reported in a secret cable on the February 1995 massacre, had even heard of the group that had organized the fundraising event, the Harkat-ul-Ansar. The Harkat, he wrote, was made up of Afghan jihad veterans who served under the Islamist warlord Jalaluddin Haqqani. The organization, the cable recorded, promised permanent jihad against governments which they accuse of persecuting Muslims. 4 years later, months after their country had bombed his camps in Afghanistan, American diplomats came face to face with that very Jalaluddin, hoping to persuade him to hand over Osama bin Laden. The warlord, memos show us, was exquisitely polite. It was, he said, good to meet someone from the country which had destroyed my base, my madrasa, and killed 25 of my mujahideen. He declined to request the handover of Al-Qaeda's chief. Earlier this week, Khalil Haqqani, brother to Jalaluddin and uncle to his heir Sirajuddin, a key figure in the network responsible for over 1,000 suicide bombings in Afghanistan, was killed in a suicide attack claimed by the Islamic State. There's much more to this story, though, than just mere irony. Less than a week before his uncle's assassination, Sirajuddin, the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan's deputy chief, had lashed out at its emir and his boss, Hibatullah Akhundzada, for labeling the Taliban's opponents infidels or apostates. Tensions had also flared between the two over the imposition of taxes in Haqqani-ruled territories, which have been exempt for over a century. Likely, the gushing praise of his errant second-in-command in the Western press further stoked Hibatullah's anger. Most importantly, though, Islamabad has grown increasingly concerned about the Haqqanis' failure to enforce the ceasefire negotiated with the Tehreek-e-Taliban, or TTP, who are now regularly striking across the border. Once described by a senior American intelligence officer as a veritable arm of Pakistan's Inter-Services Intelligence Directorate, the Haqqanis now appear to be slipping out of Islamabad's control. I do not know who carried out this act, Sirajuddin proclaimed at his uncle's funeral, a statement of obvious significance coming just hours after the Islamic State claimed responsibility. And Emir Hibatullah chose not to attend the last rites. From their strongholds in the remote Shahi Kot mountains, Haqqani wireless operators once relayed news of the trials of war to the ISI. Brother John, you are a very weak writer by English, one irate message from 1989 reads, perhaps protesting delays in supplies. Following 9/11, the once powerful jihadist citadel, though, seemed to crumble. Late in 2007, with peace on the horizon, the United States funded a construction of an all-weather asphalt road, cutting northwest from Khost to Gardez, along paths the Haqqani forces had once used to assault Soviet and Afghan troops. The Indian subcontractors hired for the $176 million road project, though, came under relentless terrorist attack and construction ground to a halt. The problem was resolved only when $1 million a month was arranged in bribes for the Haqqani Network. The warlord whom Texas Congressman Charlie Wilson had once called goodness personified when he fought the Soviets was now being financed by the very country that had come to Afghanistan to destroy his jihad. Ever since the 1970s, Jalaluddin had been a key player in Western-backed wars against Afghanistan's socialist rulers. providing access through his Loya Paktia stronghold to ISI-backed jihadists. The network's leadership was drawn from seminaries linked to the Darul Uloom Haqqaniya seminary in Akora Khatak, southeast of Peshawar, where Jalaluddin had once been a student. The first insurrection by ISI-based Islamists was crushed in 1975, but the Haqqanis had positioned themselves to profit from the anti-Soviet jihad, which began 4 years later in 1979. The CIA officer in charge of handling the Haqqanis would later record that America and the ISI handed hundreds of millions of dollars in cash and material to the organization. The Haqqani base at Zawar drew fighters from across the world, including Kashmiri jihadis and the men who would later found Al-Qaeda. After the Afghan jihad and the cutoff of American aid, Jalaluddin increasingly relied on Arab jihadists to sustain his empire. Appointed Minister of Justice by the Mujahideen forces that seized the country in 1992, he retreated to his Loya Paktia redoubts, staying out of the power struggle in Kabul. Fighters of the Haqqani Network later supported the Taliban against ethnic Tajik Mujahideen, cementing their place in the Taliban hierarchy. Even though Jalaluddin's relationship with the Taliban's Kandahar-based clerics remained pretty tense, he was appointed Minister for Borders. Then came 9/11, and for some time it seemed the world had changed. Early one morning in September 2008, 5 missiles struck Jalaluddin's home in Darpa Khel in Pakistan's Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. The explosions killed one of his 2 wives, his sister-in-law, and 8 of his grandchildren. Following his retreat from Kabul in 2001, Jalaluddin had rebuilt his empire based out of Pakistan's Miran Shah, south of Khost. This region became a mini emirate controlled by Haqqani gunmen who levied taxes on farmers and shopkeepers even as they received a steady flow of ISI funding. Foreign fighters continued to flow into the region, among them David Coleman Headley, the 26/11 perpetrator. The bazaar is bustling with Chechens, Uzbeks, Tajiks, Russians, Bosnians, some from European countries, and of course our Arab brothers, Headley would later recall. Led by Lieutenant General Parvez Ashfaq Kiani, the ISI had resumed its support for the Taliban in 2004, hoping to install a pro-Pakistan government in Kabul. Elements of the insurgency grouped together in Taliban shuras or councils operating out of Quetta and Peshawar. The most lethal of these shuras, though, was run by the Haqqanis from Miran Shah. The Miran Shah Shura staged bombings and suicide attacks in Kabul, among them an assault on the Indian embassy, which was later found to have been directly carried out on the orders of the ISI. To secure the lines of access into Afghanistan, the Haqqani Network became deeply involved in Shia-Sunni sectarian conflict in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa's Kurram region. In 2010, Shia tribes had begun to resist the use of Kurram as a transit route for jihadists, fearing it would lead to the loss of their lands. Together with Jalaluddin, Khalil Haqqani negotiated a deal between tribal elders, allowing for limited use of those territories. The agreement fell apart though, and the Pakistan army handed the region over to the Haqqani Network to enforce jihadist movement. Even as the jihadist offensive reared its high noon, tensions over power and wealth flared up within the Taliban's ranks. Emir Hibatullah Akhundzada sought to avert conflict by dividing operational control of Taliban forces between the Haqqanis and Muhammad Yaqub, the son of the slain ruler of the first emirate, Mullah Muhammad Omar. This denied the Haqqanis charge of a military of which they saw themselves as the principal sword arm, fueling their net resentments. First past the gates of Kabul in 2021, Khalil and Sirajuddin Haqqani spearheaded the Taliban's triumph over the Afghan Republic. However, the government of the Second Islamic Emirate ended up being dominated by figures who had held office before 9/11, mainly from southern Afghanistan. Taliban Defense Minister Abdul Qayyum Zakir was from Helmand. He served in the First Emirate. So did Interior Minister Ibrahim Sadr and Finance Minister Gul Ishaqzai, and as well as several others. Though both Khalil and Sirajuddin became ministers, they did not enjoy control of and revenues from the country's coveted major urban centers. Last year, Sirajuddin publicly criticized the regime's harsh policies on women. Less visibly, the Haqqanis also allowed the TTP and the Islamic State to operate from some of their territories, avoiding confrontation or competition with these two groups. For its part, the Islamic State focused its energies on attacks in Kandahar, Bamiyan, and Afghanistan's north, leaving Haqqani territory alone. The Haqqanis, interestingly, have a long territory of tacit cooperation with the Islamic State, dating back to a 2017 agreement between the two groups in the Zabul region. The two organizations also cooperated in staging suicide attacks in Kabul. Late in 2018, the Haqqani Network even brokered a peace deal between the Islamic State and the ISI, which gave ISIS haven inside Pakistan in return for ending its attacks inside that country. For decades now, Afghanistan's jihadist landscape has been a maze of mirrors. Even though an Islamic State assassin might well have been responsible for the suicide attack on Khalil, its fallout is almost certain to fuel the power struggle within the Second Emirate. The Islamic State itself, meanwhile, has capitalized on the battles in Afghanistan, leveraging them to create a base from which it can stage attacks eventually across the world. Khalil's death, just like his brother's rise, could end up having bloody consequences for the entire world. I'm Praveen Swami and I'm a contributing editor to ThePrint. Thank you for watching this episode of Security Code.